I'd like to talk about what is called the 4 practices of Bodhidharma, and see what they look like from a Pure Land point of view. Bodhidharma, as you probably know, founder of Zen in China, generally regarded as such, was the leading disciple of somebody called Brazier, who lived in India. Traveled from India to China and had quite a colourful history, probably, though it's sort of much decorated with legends, so it's quite hard to tell what's fact and what's fantasy. But we're not really greatly concerned with the history in this talk. The 4 practices of Bodhidharma are quite interesting. The first of the 4 practices of Bodhidharma is to suffer injustice. First practice is to suffer injustice. The second practice is to adapt to circumstance. The third practice is to seek for nothing. And the fourth practice is to practice emptiness. So this is one way of describing the spiritual life. We might not get past the first one. Or we could take any of them and probably make a complete meal out of the one ingredient. I think that we have to look into our own psychology, our own culture, our own attitudes to understand these practices. They're all variants on Shakyamuni's intention to help us overcome conceit. Shakyamuni Buddha taught essentially the replacement of greed, hate and delusion by sila, samadhi and prajna respectively. And often we sort of, if we do them at all, we do them to some degree in that order. The first thing we manage in a spiritual life is to place some restraint on our greed, not always. And this is the kind of core of sila, of right conduct, is restraint. And the Buddha taught restraint in many ways. He taught his bhikkhus to have their empty begging bowl and to ask for nothing, to simply have their bowl and eat what was put into it. And some days you went hungry and some days you had enough left over to give to other people. This certainly taught a lot of restraint. Then, I think greed's the sort of thing we in various ways, all sorts of different sorts of greed. There's lots of things that, according to its many objects. But it's probably not till considerably later in our practice for many people. This generalization doesn't always go this way, sometimes entirely the opposite way around. But I think for many people it's quite a long time before they actually even acknowledge the hate that they're carrying, let alone do anything about it or realize what an enormous amount of energy there is there actually. This is like greed is like burning coal, but hate is like uranium. It's a sort of fissile material that can get completely out of control very quickly and tends to feed on itself. So the energy there is enormous. And that this should transform into samadhi, into a pure, calm, concentrated state of mind. For this to happen truly is to release enormous energy into our life. But the samadhi lies beyond our hatred, and if we don't face our hatred, then we can produce a sort of replica of samadhi. We can sit with our legs folded up and spend long times in silence, but often all we're doing is ruminating, and we're not actually, one thinks of, I think it was Rinzai castigating his monks for thinking they were meditating when he said they were just sitting there like sacks of rice. It's very easy to produce a replica of what looks like a spiritual life. But beyond greed and hate lies delusion. And delusion, from the Buddha's point of view, primarily is conceit. Our ego. The ego is our sort of, in 20th century psychoanalytic terms, the ego is a psychological complex. Everything that comes within range gets sort of grabbed in and used in some way, becomes what in Buddhism we call lakshana, becomes a signpost, becomes something that is, as it were, reinterpreted or interpreted. Yes, probably interpreted, because we probably never make never make a clean perception first. Things are interpreted in terms of me, what I need, what will show me in a good light, what will make me shine in some way or other. And so the Buddha was very interested in helping us to get beyond conceit, which he saw as most fundamental, more fundamental even than greed and hate. And if people could do that, then they didn't. That was what mattered, as it were. The sila and samadhi would flow naturally if you could do that. but most of us not there. Most of us bamboo. You know, we've got mountains of stuff. So when we look at our own situation and our own culture, we as Western people with a particular history and framework and culture and all the ideas that are sort of embedded in that culture, because we have come at spirituality in a slightly different way in history, these things shape up in a particular fashion for us. And beyond the sort of simple gross levels of these greed, hate and delusion phenomena, once we sort of get into some sort of spiritual path, or even if we don't actually, how does conceit manifest? Well, it often manifests as us wanting to be justified. We want to be right. We want to be on the right side. We want to be beyond the reach of anybody's blame or criticism. And we put a huge amount of energy into this, into trying to stay in that position. It can become a script for a whole life. In big ways, and in small ways it affects our conversation with one another, our way of going about things, all the time. And so when Bodhidharma's first practice is suffer injustice, it sort of like stroking the cat's hair backwards, you know. It rubs us up the wrong way. You know, it's a challenge to things that we've absorbed and absorbed and absorbed and absorbed and practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced without ever realizing we're doing it for the most part. You know, you imagine making a film. You know, this script would not get accepted in Hollywood, but imagine making a film in which, in the early stages of the film, you establish your characters. That's what you're supposed to do. You have various scenes that get the characters well established, and by a third of the way through the film, we know that some people are very good people and some people are very bad people. You've been to films like this. I'm sure you've all been to many films where a third of the way through the film, you've got that well established in your mind, and the film then unfolds, and the bad people, let's say in this film, the bad people subject the good people to all sorts of injustices, and at the end of the film the bad people are all rich and successful and the good people are all humiliated, miserable or dead. Have you seen many films like that?
Bodhidharma never made a film like that.
No, I think the only films of this kind you're likely to have seen are ones which are dramatizations of Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. If you go back in history far enough, you'll find that our culture was not quite so imbued with the idea that the good always win and the bad are always defeated, as it is today. Tragedy was once regarded as the pinnacle of art. It was the most spiritual, most profound form of artistic expression. Nowadays we can't face it. Even fairy stories, which if you read the sort of originals, are often quite tragic, very frightening, have some quite horrendous figures in them, have been transformed into Disneyland and become cuddly toys. So something has happened in our culture that's made it very difficult for us, or because we find it very difficult, we have transformed our culture. Whichever way around the causation is, it's hard to say. But where we find it much harder to face reality. We don't want to be shown things that actually happen. We want a idealized, sanitized, tidied up script, reinforced over and over and over again. And we need it reinforced over and over again so that we can keep our fantasy alive, and we can all massage each other psychologically along these same lines, so that it stays solid for us and doesn't fray at the edges through our experience of actual life. Bodhidharma's first practice strikes us as, comes to us as striking, comes to us as with an element of shock, you see. We have the idea that I must be justified. I must be on the side of those who are justified. The just must always win. It's not a big step from there to the winners are always just. So that we start then looking at whoever lost as villains. And so whenever a war ends, we have war crimes trials, and we punish the losers for their crimes, which fundamentally are the crime of having lost, because that puts them in the category of being bad people. But this then kind of runs through our whole day-to-day interactions as well. It runs through our reflections on our own life. It runs through what we regard as legitimate things to feel, legitimate things to say, legitimate things to express to one another. There are many of them rooted in these notions of justice and of the good winning, as it were. So Bodhidharma says, we have to cut through all that. What was the sword that Alexander, the Gordian knot. Alexander cut through the Gordian knot with his sword. There needs to be a sort of sword of Manjushri to cut through this knot that keeps us from liberation, keeps us tied up. So to suffer injustice, to recognize that we suffer injustice, and not immediately then just to and it must not happen, and it certainly must not happen to me, etc., which is the source of all our trouble, really. The Buddha in the Dhammapada says, what does he say? He says, they injured me, they hurt me, they injured me, they stole from me, they abused me, they insulted me. In those who think such things, hatred will never cease. They injured me, they stole from me, they abused me, they insulted me, humiliated me. In those who do not harbour such thoughts, hatred will cease. Hatred is not overcome by hatred. Hatred is overcome by love. And I think these are some of the most powerful words in the Dhammapada, which is a book full of powerful words. Adapt to circumstance is the second practice. And this is kind of another side of the same coin. We are subject to, Bodhidharma also says somewhere else, we are all just subject to conditions. And this is true, we're subject to conditions. we're very vulnerable creatures. Of course, from a Pure Land point of view, this is kind of familiar ground. We're vulnerable, we're fragile creatures. Change of circumstance, and we move from happiness to misery to whatever, envy, resentment, feeling smug, feeling overjoyed. It's all because of what came in the news, in our letterbox, in our interest, whatever. That's how we are. Can we adapt to the circumstances that we find ourselves in? Buddha, go back to Buddha, that wandering monk with his bowl, he adapted. He slept where he found himself. He stayed in a place for a few days and then he moved on. In that physical circumstance, I find myself in that sort of position a lot. My life is stay a few days and move on. And each place I'm in other people's hands. So this particular practice, the second practice of Bodhidharma, is quite a sort of watchword for me. It's something I have to think about all the time. So this is where I am. Okay, can I adapt to this? Don't go a lot on this particular diet, but can I adapt to it? And so on. And you see that this is another side, because the conceit manifests as I must have. In a way, the sort of I must be justified is the sort of hate side of conceit, and the I must have is the greed side of conceit. And so these first two practices are like that. They're impinging on the two props of conceit, as it were. Whether we can be flexible, whether we can adapt, whether we can accept. Amida Buddha. Why is Amida Buddha the most revered, most widespreadly respected, worshipped Buddha in the whole Buddhist world? And because Amida is the Buddha of complete acceptance. Buddha accepts. Amida Buddha accepts. Amida Buddha accepts us with all our greed, hate and delusion. Accepts things as they are. We're probably not going to be perfect replicas of Amida Buddha. But still, it's it's like it's something like that is like the sun. The planets go round it. We can't go too close, but we are going round that. That's the center of gravity that we are orbiting, which is to do with acceptance. And of course, acceptance is closely related to the first practice, because things aren't necessarily just. And ideas of justice anyway are purely human construction. With justice goes the idea that such and such should not happen. But since such and such is something that does happen, who says? Who says it shouldn't happen? We do. It's our construct. It's our idea that it shouldn't happen. It does happen. People shouldn't lie to me. Really? Who in this room hasn't told a lie? We've all told lies. And when we tell lies, of course, we think we've got a good reason for doing it. So maybe the person who lies to me thinks they've got a good reason for doing it. Maybe I just can't see it from where I am. And that's the situation. You can't see the whole picture. And this is why acceptance is very important, because you're always in a position where you can't see the whole picture. So you have to at the very least start from acceptance, even if you then decide it would be a good idea to change something here. The compassionate thing we could do to change something here. You see, the Buddhist principle is not justice. The Buddhist principle is compassion. It essentially means, can we see a way to make a better future? Not, can we rectify what's gone wrong in the past? Often what's gone wrong in the past can't be rectified. You can't bring back the dead. You can't... it is impossible for us to be justified, actually. The benefits we receive are enormous. The amount of good we do is relatively small. We're rather weak creatures. Even collectively, we can only do a certain amount. And there's no way we can extricate ourselves from implication in all manner of ills and evils, in all sorts of ways. So, where does that kind of acceptance go? Well, Bodhidharma's third practice is seek for nothing. Don't look for a success. Don't look for an achievement. And the other side of this coin is leave it all to the great law of the universe. And this is the sense that how do you make the future better? How do you make things improve? By doing good in a kind of what Buddhists would call an empty way. Without we can only do that if we can get such and such a result from it. You see? What the good that one does has to be gratuitous in that sense. And this is the practicing of emptiness, which is the fourth practice. These words are sort of abstruse, and it's very easy to get sort of sucked down into complicated philosophy and pages of analysis and this and that. But what is practicing emptiness? I'm learning Spanish. If in Spain somebody thanks you for something, they say muchas gracias. You say de nada. Yes. In England in the old days, and perhaps in Canada still, you say, oh, it was nothing. Think nothing of it. It was nothing. It was nothing. Yeah. Practicing emptiness is living that. Is living de nada. Living. It was nothing. Yeah. Not needing. Because otherwise, what else? What's the alternative? What else happens? You see, what else happens is that whatever good one does, like in the Summary of Faith and Practice, do not thereby think that something of relevance to your own salvation is thereby accomplished. You suck the thing into. We suck the thing into our own self-justification project. And so, although superficially what we did may be a good thing, it becomes, as it were, contaminated, it's soiled, it's dirted by the fact that it's actually become part of my how I justify myself project. And even though we can get to a point where many of the things we do just do in a generous sort of everyday way, often out of good habit, good manners and good training and education and so on. Still, if we're challenged at all, where do we go? We spring to our defences. Oh yes, but I did this and this. And we've got our list of the good things I did that justify me, you see. And we started off talking about Bodhidharma and his story. Of course, the really famous story about Bodhidharma is his confrontation with the emperor. When the emperor said, I have endowed so many monasteries, I have built so many almshouses, I have constructed hospitals, I have, what merit have I accomplished? And Bodhidharma said, none whatsoever. And this is the famous story of Bodhidharma's encounter with the emperor, which sort of rings down the ears. And then, Bodhidharma relented slightly and said, well, there is relative merit in these things. There is good karma. But Buddhism is about escaping from karma, not about constructing good karma rather than bad karma. It's about liberation. It's about getting out of this net, not about making the net more comfortable. So these are four practices of Bodhidharma. And you can see, I think, how they're to do with letting go of, and before letting go of, getting some leverage on, some awareness of the extent to which we are caught up in this kind of self-justification project, this conceit. And from while the rhetoric of Zen is generally worded so as to say, well, snap out of it, be different from now on, from today, no more conceit. That's a sort of Zen approach, And in China they say Zen is the most direct, most perfect, most wonderful way of enlightenment. It's just that 99% of people can't do it. So the other 99% practice Pure Land. Because Pure Land starts from an acceptance of human nature, of a common lot, that we're the 99% who can't do it. But still, there's a lot to be gained from the Nequan exercise, from looking at what is our nature. Who is it who calls the Buddha's name? This what we would be snapping out into would be Amida Buddha. Well, if we're not Amida Buddha, we call to Amida Buddha. We invoke Amida Buddha, we ask Amida Buddha to help us to be in our lives. And to do that, to really do that, we have to recognize our nature. We have to recognize our nature as in that 99%. We have to recognize our nature as shot through with conceit of various kinds. That makes our blood boil sometimes, that leads us to anger and rejection, that leads us to self-pity, and leads us to all sorts of strategies of drawing attention to the good I have done, or belittling other people, or trying to shift out of the blame for something that went badly wrong, and so on. Buddhism is all in the opposite direction. The Tibetans have a practice, don't they, of Tonglen, thank you, which again is another variant on the same theme. It's like trying to get us out of the mentality of, oh, that's bad, that's yours. That's good, I'll have it. Which is how we kind of have been deeply instinctively trained to behave, but which actually just makes the bad worse, because the next person doesn't want it either, so they're going to give it back. And so in no time we're in this ping pong match of trying with instead of a ping pong ball we've got a hot potato, and it's going backwards and forwards, and we're both getting our hands burnt, at least our hands, often our hearts. And that's our conceit. So Pure Land recognize that that's how we are. That's the sort of creatures we are. That's the sort of thing we do. That all of us have done it sometime, probably quite often in small ways, occasionally in big ways. And for many of us it's also a kind of background script, even though it's not kind of manifest up front in our shop window, as it were, all the time. It's there in the background, it's there in the self-talk, it's there in the sort of chat, it's there in the things that we think over as we're going to sleep at night, well, that should never have happened to me, or that person was wrong, or what did they do that for, or what in the Anthill Sutra is called fuming by day fuming by night and flaming by day. Yeah, this is the product of conceit. So these are practices of Bodhidharma. And you can see that we say practices, and people say, oh, he's going to talk about practices, he's going to tell us how to sit, or what to chant, these are things that are not formal things, that they're life. They're about recognizing the reality of life. This is life. And then recognizing what we do with it, how we respond to it, how we are in our response to it, how we cherish our hurts, how we keep them going for a long time, years sometimes, how we then take them out on other people, and then of course they have something to hang on to for many years, and so on, and so and of course these people should go to war with those people. Their ancestors 800 years ago were unjustly treated by those people, blah, blah, blah. How could they do anything else, you see? When we think like that, of course we are condemning the world to terrible things. So this is another aspect of practicing emptiness. Emptiness means that things are not in themselves what we put on them. What we put on them is what we put on them. We might think, the battle of so-and-so was an injustice to my people when it occurred 800 years ago. And therefore today I must go and kill all those descendants of that other people. Or we might think this thing that happened to me in my childhood was blah, blah, blah. And so there's no choice in my life but that I be such and such today. When we think like that, we think there is no choice but, we're not liberated. That's the whole meaning of not liberated. We think there's no choice. We think we have to be this way. I have to feel these things. I have to think these things. That's how it is. The meaning of emptiness is that the things that we think is aren't. That's bad grammar, but never mind. They're not. From their own side, they're just what they were. And they could be construed in any number of ways. And one of the things that, when you start to sort of loosen up a little bit, what you start to notice is that life is actually full of ironies. Things don't actually stay where we put them in our minds. In my own experience this year, some of which we've talked about in groups, which has been very up and down, all sorts of things have happened. Some of the things that have happened, which I would, if I just take them in isolation, I say, well, that was a terrible defeat, that was a real failure. And actually, if you look at the subsequent sequence of events, have proved to be building blocks or foundation stones for really good things that have developed. And actually, when I look back on those things, I wouldn't have taken the step that led to the good things developing if the bad things hadn't happened. So were they bad things? You see? Or were they necessary steps? Yeah? When you read, the Christian, English Christian equivalent is the Meditations of Julian of Norwich. Julian basically asks the question, if God's good, why is there sin in the world? And without going into a whole rigmarole about it, the answer she gets is that sin is behovable, but all shall be well. Behovable means it's a necessary part of the scheme of things. It's part and parcel. And things happen. Things happen for reasons. They happen because of conditions. Sometimes something happens and I come out of it looking really good. Sometimes things happen and I come out of it like a pile of unmentionables. but, you know, how will it be in 3 months' time? A year's time? 5 years' time? You know? And it's quite complicated, because you could say, oh, well, in that case one should be completely serene and detached, and not be touched, not be moved by these things. But if I hadn't been moved by the defeat, I wouldn't have done what turned out to be the step that created the positive move in the future. If I'd just been serene and detached and above it all, yeah, wouldn't have done anything. See? So there's a funny, uncanny sort of wisdom in our Bamboo nature. There are things operating. It's not just a matter of identify the bad, get rid of it, and, you know, because we could easily from here move back into that self-justifying script all over again. You know, well, I can justify myself by just rising above it all, and then I shall be a perfect Buddha, and none of these things will bother me. You know?
No chance.
Well, that wouldn't do the trick. You know, it wouldn't cut the butter. You see? It's only actual real human beings that do things. Huh? So, moving from an awareness of our folly into a state of sort of benign indifference and trying to transcend the world completely and just be a fragment of Brahma floating around, doesn't actually do it either. Somehow you have to be in the mess. You have to go into the mess, and I find it very useful the notion that Buddha talked about of samajñā, asamajñā, that like both things go on at the same time. You're aware that something in you is boiling, but you are aware, so there's some other part of you at the same time, you see. And if one has an awareness that, you can have an awareness this will pass, that doesn't mean it's going to stop right now. You know, your blood's still boiling. But the wisdom helps. And these two things need to go on together somehow. We need an awareness of our Bamboo nature. And actually, if we are aware of our Bamboo nature, and we have that kind of faith in the larger process of things, as it were, then we're actually likely, unwittingly, without even realizing what we're doing, to aid in some way that we don't see at the time that kind of ironic process of the universe. See? But to do that, we've got to have that flexibility, which is Bodhidharma's second practice. See? We've got to be willing to meet the situation, respond to it, adapt to it, feel what you feel, and move on, like that. So I suppose my feeling is that the different schools of Buddhism have different styles of rhetoric. They have different ways of framing things, they have different ways of using language. Some of them do have this sort of, oh, you can just snap out of it attitude, which is true. And some of them have it's better to deepen your awareness of where you're at attitude, which is also true. And others have other attitudes. But really they all revolve around the same essential core of ideas, which is about how our ego, our conceit, poisons the best of our deeds, how the world carries on as it does, whether we approve of it or we don't approve of it. How often what we think is us being good and being clever actually makes things worse. How often things that feel to us like defeats and failures actually turn out quite well in the end. And all of this gives a deeper wisdom, a greater depth, greater depth to our life. It gives some bottom to life. Namo Mita Prabhu.